The question now is that the amendment be agreed to, and I have the call the member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Turnbull Government has introduced the VET student loan bills into the House to establish a new VET student loans program commencing January 2017. This legislation was introduced to replace the utter failure that was the VET fee help scheme introduced in 2012 by the last Labor government. This scheme, patched up by this government, us on this side of the chamber, in 2015, is now set to be overhauled entirely before the start of the next semester for most vocational training providers beginning early next year. The need for this legislation, Deputy Speaker, was clear. The VET fee help scheme was a deeply troubled Labor government policy that the Turnbull government has taken steps to remove. Our new proposal, the VET student loan program, will be more accountable, more sustainable and more accessible than its woeful predecessor. Mr Deputy Speaker, the failure of Labor's VET fee help scheme is truly something to behold. I will briefly outline for the House some of the figures from this Gillard government policy, which has proved to be an unmitigated disaster. Deputy Speaker, the costings for this program in 2012 were $325 million. By 2015, the scheme was costing Australian taxpayers $2.9 billion a year. Incredibly, fees for courses covered by the VET fee help scheme had more than doubled, Deputy Speaker, yes, doubled within 3 years, and student loans had increased to a staggering 792%. This reform, Deputy Speaker, is of course badly needed, and it will provide a win for both taxpayers and students. It is often a scheme that is so bad that it's ended marked with praise from service providers, students and taxpayers, but that is exactly what has happened with the VET fee help scheme. Deputy Speaker, there are several key changes in the proposed legislation. The new VET student loans program includes a range of measures to protect students and taxpayers and to restore trust in the vocational education sector. Firstly, Deputy Speaker, the Turnbull Government will introduce an annual levy on approved service providers to decrease the overall cost of the program and to more closely audit unscrupulous service providers. This government will also limit course eligibility for VET student loans to those courses approved by the Minister. Courses will have a high national priority, align with industry needs and lead to employment, not just graduate outcomes, Deputy Speaker. The course list will be updated regularly and subject to feedback as the changing needs of the country will need to be reflected in the approved course list. The Turnbull Government will also introduce a maximum loan amount for eligible courses. The initial loan caps will be $5,000, $10,000 and $15,000 indexed annually by the CPI. The Minister will have several new powers, Deputy Speaker, which will include the power to exempt courses with high delivery cost, such as aviation, from the loan caps, introduce new caps and to specify which courses fall within each loan cap ban. Loan caps are derived from actual VET fee help tuition data and data used to develop the New South Wales Smart and Skilled program. Deputy Speaker, this is in stark contrast to the Labor government scheme, which instead of capping loans, seemed to encourage a veritable arms race between service providers to see who could charge the most for their courses, whilst offering the largest incentive to encourage students to enrol. In many cases, students have enrolled in programs with absolutely no prospects of a job at the end of the course. And we've seen enrolments skyrocket in courses like circus skills, fortune telling, belly dancing and interpretive dance. Deputy Speaker, we want to create graduates who will grow our economy, not join a circus, Deputy Speaker. This policy, Deputy Speaker, is why we saw the disgraceful behaviour of some of the private training service providers and young and vulnerable students saddled with debts from diplomas they were completely unqualified to be studying and had no hope of completing and definitely no job at the end of it. Deputy Speaker, when the Labor Party attempted to feebly defend their economic record, one must only direct their gaze towards the complete failure that is this policy. Not only did this scheme blow out to cost the taxpayer some $3 billion a year, it also financially saddled young people from poor and disadvantaged areas and also overseas students. Indeed, many of these service providers targeted Indigenous areas and populations, signing students up with the promises of a free upfront iPad or perhaps a laptop so they could jack up their fees and make the taxpayer pay for it. Absolutely shameful, Deputy Speaker. This policy is by any measure an absolute failure and is particularly abhorrent that the victims of this policy are in the main young, disadvantaged people who were simply attempting to better themselves and earn themselves a qualification. Deputy Speaker, it simply is heartbreaking for many of those young people. A change will also be made in regards to the requirement for student progression for continued access to the loan, designed to protect vulnerable students. Deputy Speaker, this is especially relevant for regional students in my electorate of Durack who have relocated for study, as they often need to defer in order to work and save money before returning to their studies. We will strengthen compliance and payment arrangements via a range of measures inbuilt into this legislation because of the woeful lack of safeguards included in the original legislation. These will include greater monitoring and investigation powers and enforcement provisions through the use of civil penalties, infringement notices, enforcement undertakings and injunctions. The government will also be able to immediately suspend a provider in urgent circumstances if required. This government will also be banning the use of brokers or agents to engage or recruit students in relation to loans, and any unsolicited contact with students in relation to enrolling in a vocational training institution is now also prohibited, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, we will also require approved providers to only subcontract training to other approved VET student loan providers or higher education providers approved by the Tertiary Education Quality Agency. Individual subcontractors engaged to provide specialist expertise for part of a course will be allowed on a case-by-case basis. Deputy Speaker, introduction of an application fee for providers to apply to become a VET student loan approved provider. An annual levy on providers will be established through the accompanying VET student loans charges bill of 2016. All existing VET fee help providers will have to apply to be approved under the new program. Deputy Speaker, this will allow the government to weed out the unscrupulous and predatory service providers allowed to flourish under the Labor policy. States, territories and employer groups have called for significant reform to protect the integrity of Australia's high-quality training system and to ensure the system is delivering the skills needed for work. And Deputy Speaker, that is what we are delivering in these bills. Deputy Speaker, this bill must be passed quickly. Otherwise, there will be no government loan program to assist students for the first semester of next year, which of course will be an unmitigated disaster. A disaster so large it may only be matched by the disaster that was this VET fee help scheme administered by those opposite during their time in government. Deputy Speaker, this is the final part of this government's commitment to fixing Labor's mess in regards to student loans and expands on the good work done on this program in 2015. We've already removed the cold calling and inducements from the program, where we saw predatory training providers luring in vulnerable students into courses they were wholly unsuitable for, as I said previously, with bonuses like iPads and laptops. Deputy Speaker, this badly needed reset is necessary to encourage trust and support in our training sector, a sector that has been tarnished by endless scandal since the VET fee help program was introduced by those opposite in 2012. Deputy Speaker, the VET student loan program will see stronger course eligibility criteria, mandatory student engagement measures and a stronger focus on students successfully completing courses. All of this is designed to benefit the student. Deputy Speaker, for far too long our training providers and our higher education services have focused on the number of students we are producing, but this government is committed not to bulk tonnage of students, but to the quality of the graduates our institutions are producing. Deputy Speaker, this is an important part of our election commitment to a more robust and flexible economy, and I firmly believe that this economic future rests on the backs of high-quality, skilled graduates. These young people will be responsible for driving our economy and filling skilled roles in our economy for decades to come. Deputy Speaker, Australia simply cannot afford another vet fee help debacle. The vocational students of this country deserve better. The hard-working teachers and trainers deserve better. And the taxpayers of Australia deserve a better economic management than what has been offered up by the Labor government and the vet fee help scheme. Deputy Speaker, I commend these bills to the House.
I thank the member for Durack.